Barnaby Joyce, thanks for your time. Can I just start on the bushfire situation? It is affecting your electorate, and you've reacted pretty strongly today to the Greens leader, Richard Di Natale, who's linked climate change to what's going on.
Well, he's linked the gun debate and he's linked gun massacres into what's going on, and I just think this is an absurdity. You go into a debate, people have lost their house. We've got one of the guys, Smith, is in hospital by reason of burns and burns into his lungs. And what's the gun debate? Seriously, is that what does that actually add to it? All it does is gets him a headline. We should be talking about empathy. We should be talking about recovery. We should be talking about more watering points. There is nothing that the Greens, Di Natale or anybody else, can move in this Parliament that is going to stop bushfires. Nothing at all.
Let's turn to some of the issues you're pushing this week, certainly ahead of the National Party's Federal Council meeting on the weekend, coming up on the weekend. Your idea, you've been on about this for a while, of having a better regional representation in the Senate. Explain to me again what your idea is.
Okay, regional senators. What we have in Australia is we have, by reason of our constitution, an equivalent number of senators per state. In this instance, at this point in time, 12. They are allocated as one electorate at the state, but the Constitution, and without being too highfalutin, in Part 2, the first section, Section 7, says that until the Parliament otherwise decides. So those senators within the state can be allocated around the state. And that would allow us to have 6 regions, 2 senators per region, one half the regions going up in one election, the next half of the next election. We have our system of politics, David, based on the West Washington system, the Westminster for the House of Representatives, Washington for the Senate. And
you can do this with legislation, is your point?
Yes, and if the United States of America can live with 2 senators for New York, why does Adelaide have 11?
Well, you do end up with distortions, though, don't you, where in Tasmania, if you had 12 senators from Tasmania, only 2 of them could represent Hobart, you'd have 10 representing very few people, compared to 2 representing all of Sydney, which is, what, 4.5 million people.
Yeah, but I mean, is that a problem for New York? California has 40 million people and 2 senators, and Rhode Island has about 1 million people and 2 senators.
You'd end up here, though, with a much heavier weight towards regional senators and urban senators.
Well, what happened with our constitution, David? We always thought we'd develop more states, and we didn't. Therefore, we had this sort of concentration of senators staying where they were. We increased the number of senators, and they just moved to the capital city. If you take Western Australia, 12 senators, 11 live in Perth. South Australia, 12 senators, 11 live in Adelaide. Victoria, 12 senators, 11 live in Melbourne. New South Wales, 12 senators, 11 live in Sydney and 1 quasi in Wollongong. That is just actually exacerbating the mandate that is already held by the lower house.
But your idea would tip the scales dramatically in the other direction.
And what is wrong with that? And what you would have...
Good for the National Party.
Good for Indigenous representation. Rather than a voice to Parliament, they'd have a voice in Parliament, because you can bet your bottom dollar that from the Gulf would come Aboriginal senators, Indigenous senators, from the Kimberley.
And some come back your idea?
Absolutely, Indigenous senators. In fact, we could utilise their First Nations areas as part of the delineation of these new Senate regions, and so you could have, although you might have my seat, the New England, but the Senate area, the Senate region would be Kamilaroi, Banjalon.
Probably in the Northern Territory you only get 2 senators because it's a territory, but...
Yeah, but this is something we can do.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Labor Party policy would move towards looking after these people, and issues such as health, education, regional development, yeah, they would be assisted. But what we have at the moment is ridiculous. We've got about 4 or 5 seats that represent 80% of our landmass. We all know that's ridiculous.
A couple of other issues. The family of Tamil asylum seekers being held on Christmas Island, you want them returned to Billawheeler. Just explain to me why you think they should be allowed to stay.
Look, my main issue there, and first of all, you know, I do this with you know, a whole sense of... first of all, I know it's not popular. What I'm saying is not popular. If I tried it out on my local council meetings, you know, party meetings, they didn't support me at all.
Is that right? How'd it go down?
Not well. But I mean, but that doesn't matter. You've got to do what's right. Sometimes in this job, you got to believe what's right.
Why is this right?
These 2 kids were born in Australia. They were born here, you know, and there's something I find uncomfortable that I get 2 kids that are born in Australia, and we move them to a country which they're never from. You can only send them back to one place, Billawheeler.
But do you make that a general rule? If you're born in Australia, you should be allowed to stay?
No, I think in this instance, I'm not that wise as to reach that far. What I can say is in this instance, we should have looked at a way around this issue. I understand the vexed issue that Minister Dutton has. He's doing a great job.
But do you think this is... So you're not saying all asylum seekers who have kids here should be allowed to stay?
Well, I think that if people use it as part of a plan to stay here, but
this is a special case.
That's a different issue. But these two kids, as far as I'm concerned, are born here. They're Australian kids, and Australian kids should stay in Australia. Doesn't
sound like the government's going to budge on this, though.
Didn't sound like my party meeting the other day was going to budge on it much either. Right. But you got to speak up. If you don't speak up, well, why are you in this joint? And sometimes you've got to say things that even your own supporters don't support.
Final one, government wants to drug test welfare recipients.
No problems with that.
Jackie Lambie says, well, we should drug test politicians while we're at it.
No problems with that either.
No worries with that?
No worries with that whatsoever.
Do you think anyone in this building would be in trouble?
I don't know. How about you guys going to the media?
I don't know.
I go check your toilets out, doing a few lines, mate.
I'm not sure about that. But, not that I've seen in my many years here.
I don't.
You don't think it'll be a problem?
I'm being flippant. No, I don't. I think it's absolutely fine. I think they're. What you should be doing is, if you work with heavy machinery, you have to do a drugs test. If you work in a mines, you have to do a drug test. If you work in Parliament, I've got no problems with that whatsoever. And if you are taking the taxpayer's dollar by being on Social Security, I think the taxpayer's entitled to say, if I have to go through a drug test at work, then so can you.
Barnaby Joyce, thanks for joining me.